So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our start of our spring CE series and our Child and Adolescent Professional Development series. I'm Donna Bartlett. I am a member of the outreach team at SunCloud Health. SunCloud Health provides integrated, nuanced treatment with residential PHP, IOP, and virtual services for adults and PHP, IOP, and residential for adolescents ages 12 to 18, focusing on treating the whole person in Naperville, Northbrook, Lincoln Park, and Matson, Illinois. If you're interested in learning more about our services, myself and Lori Kehoe, who's also on here, our contact information will be included in the last slide for your reference. To make a referral, you can contact one of us directly or call our intake number, which is listed. Lori and I will also be following up with you after the session. Please note that to receive your CE credit, you will need to remain on the Zoom for the entirety of the presentation. Also, you will receive an email, including the quiz and the survey. Please complete these to receive your CE certificate by email. You should expect to receive your CE certificate within 10 days. Okay, let me introduce our presenter for today. We are so thankful that Justin was able to jump in because unfortunately our other speaker was not able to make it today. But Justin Wolfe, he is an LCPC, a CADC, a CRC, a PCGC, a CCTP, and a graduate of Adler University. He is also a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. He is currently the clinical director at Forest Behavioral Health in Hoffman Estates, where he oversees IOP and PH programming for adults presenting with mental health and substance use challenges. He also facilitates an adult dual diagnosis support group through NAMI DuPage that is open to the local community. Throughout his career, Justin has served in a wide range of clinical roles, ranging from working as a clinical therapist in a hospital-based program to supporting organizations' entire clinical system through program development, clinical training, and direct consultation. These experiences have given him a deep appreciation for how care is delivered at every level and has the ability to transform lives. Justin has extensive experience working with adolescents, adults, and families across the residential, PHP, IOP, and outpatient therapy settings. Clinically, he specializes in supporting individuals navigating anxiety, depression, stress, co-occurring disorders, addiction, and family conflict. His therapeutic approach integrates motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy. In recent years, Justin has the privilege of providing CEU trainings across the country, collaborating with professionals who share a commitment to improving outcomes and showing up for others in their time of need. Justin has also had the opportunity to present an ASUM conference on the topic of utilizing contingency management within addiction treatment. Whether he is developing clinical context, supporting teams through change, or facilitating meaningful learning opportunity, Justin focuses remains the same, equipping people with the tools they need to better serve. Take it away, Justin.
Well, thanks, Donna. Appreciate that. And thanks everybody for joining. Always forget how long that is. So today's presentation, and I appreciate everybody being flexible and kind of adjusting and joining here. Really kind of looking at just currently what the landscape of adolescent substance use looks like and really what the co-occurring disorder presentation entails. Because when somebody's actively using substances, there is, especially in adolescence, there is always something else going on. And a lot of times it's trying to figure out how do we kind of get to the core to support them so they can get back to leading the life that they want to live. And I think this landscape today has been ever evolving. I mean, substances today are so different than they were when I was growing up, 10 years ago. I mean, it's just a constant evolution. So trying to keep up and stay on top of what is actually happening within this arena is quite the task in of itself. And so when we're talking about this, and you'll kind of hear this throughout the presentation, one of the biggest and most important components of working with an individual who is presenting, whether they're using substances or have a full-blown substance use disorder, is really what does that family connection look like? in this process. And so there's quite a bit of content talking about ways to engage and involve the family when we're working with individuals here. And there was a statistic that really jumped out to me that just like startled me and caught my attention, that I wanted to make sure I shared with everybody. And well, there's that. And what that was that 60% of teens reported that their parents never talked to them about the risk of using drugs. And so what that kind of like screamed at me is like, they may have had the conversation, hey, you should not do this. Or you know what? Don't do this or else. But never really diving into the why behind it. Really kind of trying to help people understand, well, if I do make this choice, how is that going to impact me? Or how is that going to affect me? And what we got here is just a couple different pictures about what the landscape currently looks like in a lot of these very common substances that adolescents and young adults are really using nowadays. I mean, you look at the vapes, and the vapes are just, I mean, you could play games on them. Some of them play music. I mean, the one over there on the far right side looks like what used to be like an old, iPod. And just now you get to, vape out of it. And I know some of them have like Snake or other games attached to them. But also you look at the flavors that they're coming up with for these vapes, right? Crave Max Apple Blueberry. And I know like talking about vaping and kind of, how they presented it to what it actually is are two very different things in the sense of, a smoking cessation device to, oh, look, Apple Blueberry. If I'm trying to stop smoking cigarettes and I've been smoking for 20 years, that might not be the, flavor I might be enticed to use. But these substances have really been done or been marketed and put out there in an attempt to try and capture new users. And you look at Zins, very easy to cover up, to hide. It's not like dip, how dip used to be. And so that is a substance that I've seen just skyrocketing along with edibles. And I think that's really the challenge here. And we've seen hospital poisonings and reports going up for adolescents, children with these edibles because they look as if they are the actual, you know, item that they're marketed to be. You just have to look very closely, be able to tell the difference. And if you're just grabbing something, or if you have a family member who's, has edibles in the house and they're leaving them sitting out, grabbing one of these, it's hard to tell what might be an actual Oreo versus the double stuffed OEO. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've kind of noticed when I'm talking with family members, primarily about what substances look like and the impact and the effect and the potency, because those are all things that have evolved throughout the years, is that these drugs, even though we may be familiar with them from our own childhood, young adulthood, they've drastically shifted and changed. And so a lot of ideas and beliefs about what these substances are and how they affect the developing brain are still being held onto by our own personal experiences per se, and not keeping up with what is actually going on when somebody ingests or uses one of these substances. And so what we know is that the most critical time for intervention, this is something that I saw working working in an adolescent dual diagnosis program and an adolescent residential primary substance use program for individuals with co-occurring disorders. It's like this is such a critical time in an individual's life to make a change and to help support them in making that change, because we can help them have that light come back on. We can help them get on a different path that's filled with meaning, hope, helping them feel comfortable in their own skin, because this is such a critical time when that brain is developing. And I know one of the things that's really important is helping people understand that, hey, that brain isn't done developing until 25. And I think even recently they came back and they pushed it back to like late 20s, early 30s, saying, hey, that brain is continually developing until this time period. And I know one of the old adages in substance use treatment used to be like, hey, once you start using substances, you become emotionally stunted at that developmental period. And so your reasoning and problem solving skills don't continue to progress since then. And since those times of those old beliefs kind of being carried through, it's the idea of neuroplasticity, right? Like the brain does heal, it does recover, change can happen. It's just we want to make sure that brain is developing as naturally as it can with the support of growing up in a substance-free environment. We also know with that brain developing that frontal cortex, the rational side of our brain, the one that's like, that's not a good decision, you shouldn't make that choice, that part of our brain that's really kind of the brake for that impulse control isn't done developing until the brain is fully developed. So that's where the idea of these Chicago winters, where it's like, what, sledding's fun, but what's more fun, sledding off the roof. Time. Let's go do that. And so that's where it's like you see, and I tell people all the time, like I've seen quite a few adolescent young men, make the decision to go sledding off the roof, forgetting that, hey, that's cool, you're going to go down. There's just also a significant drop when you go off. So there's a pretty big risk attached to that good time. But the tape doesn't get played all the way out. The tape is like, good time, go. It's like, that pause, think, recalibrate, that's not really there. And what we also know about the earlier, and there's a lot of research and there's a lot of data out there in terms of substance use being introduced during that, these critical periods of an individual's life, is that the earlier somebody begins using substances, the greater the likelihood that they're going to have a problematic relationship with that substance or another substance throughout their lifetime. We also know that substance use, can trigger the onset of mental health problems and challenges for individuals. We've seen that it can intensify the anxiety, it can intensify the depression. And I know I spent quite a bit of time, throughout the years kind of talk with adolescents. It's like, of course you're smoking marijuana, it makes you feel relief, it kind of takes your mood from that 2 to a 7, and then you come back down, you want to kind of get back up there, and you're going back up and you smoke again, you're like, hey, I got back up to that 7 or 8, I'm feeling good. But what ends up happening over time that's not talked about is that back door gets opened. So if your mood were to drop to, like, let's say like a 1, maybe a 1, a -1 on some bad days. Well, now that back door has been opened up because of the changes that are happening in the brain from the use occurring, well, now we're dropping down to like a -3, -4, -5, hopelessness, passive suicide ideation, the idea of if I don't wake up tomorrow, so be it. Like that thought or those ideas and those facts don't really get talked about. It gets really highlighted on this is what it's going to give me without really talking about, this is where it could possibly lead me to. And now we find ourselves using it to try and get back to feeling normal, quote unquote, which is where it all began to start off with. We also know, I could just kind of reference, working, for about a decade in the dual diagnosis adolescent program. It's like there was a very common presentation that we saw with the clients that we were serving. We saw that they were having family conflict. We saw that they were having academic problems, difficulties in school with their relationships with their peers. And they also were actively using substances. And so all these things were coming together that were really feeding into feelings of hopelessness, lack of motivation, a loss of self, and overall feeling very dissatisfied, frustrated, and defeated when it came to looking at their life. And what we know when we're talking about this, because this is, I think, a really important thing or idea to kind of frame up when we're talking with our adolescents, young adults, or even adults who are in recovery or working towards recovery, is that we have to give the idea and the picture that, hey, the goal is protection, it's not perfection. Because if we give people the message that, hey, I'm expecting you to stop this and I'm expecting you to be perfect, well, now we are inadvertently communicating in that message that it's not okay to be honest. Because the way that gets interpreted from what I've heard from quite a few people is like, well, if I'm honest now, I'm going to let them down and I'm going to shine a light that things aren't okay. And so we want to let them know, hey, when these challenges come up or those internal battles are kind of going on, we don't want you to have to fight those challenges alone. We want you to be able to kind of communicate and let somebody step in to support you. And we know that goal And these challenges that a lot of adolescents face, there can be a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of just feeling like I should have this all together, but if I talk about it, it communicates I don't. And I got to keep up this image that I got it all together. I got to have a strong front. No, nobody can see internally what's going on here. And we want to make sure that we're giving people permission to open up and communicate that because we want to make sure we delay that initiation to use as long as we possibly can. Because the longer that we're able to delay that use, the greater the likelihood that they're not going to have a problematic relationship with substances. And what we have, some of the data here that I've kind of seen is like, hey, when adolescents, ages 12 to 17, who first began using cannabis, 10.7% of these individuals had a cannabis use disorder within 12 months of their first use, which is much higher than young adults who initiated use during that time. And what we also saw is that, hey, we know that anybody who started using substances before the age of 15 have a 6.5 times greater risk of developing a lifetime substance use disorder than anybody who waited until they were after the age of 21. And we know that risk decreases roughly by about 4 to 5% for each year that we're able to delay that initiation between the ages of 13 and 21. So that prevention, that work that we're doing on the front lines to really delay the initiation of use is critical for that individual's emotional well-being and their physical well-being, as well as their overall lifetime satisfaction. And so one of the big things is that we know there is a lot of misinformation about substances and addiction that just runs through our culture. We know that with the legalization and the big push to make certain substances very legal, marketing is a very powerful tool. And what people choose to put out there and the way and the frequency at which messages are communicated and the platforms in which these are communicated, they can make an impact. And people that are putting it out there know what they're doing. This also, when we're talking about, addiction or having a problem with a substance, there's a lot of, you look at the images that are out there in the media and TV shows, the way individuals are portrayed. There's a lot of just negative judgments and evaluations about these individuals, especially when they're struggling and the symptoms that are displayed from a substance use disorder, because these symptoms of this, this disorder, loved ones and people in their close circle can take those behaviors very personal. And that's the challenge, is knowing like, hey, that brain has been hijacked. This substance or those associated behaviors, whether it's gambling, pornography, sex, on top of the substances that are being used, like that can make it feel like I need this to survive and this is the most important thing in my life. So I'm going to have my behavior directed at achieving that goal and that outcome, no matter what the cost. And the people in that circle are going to feel directly impacted by that. And then when that's not being engaged in, or even when it's being engaged in, I will tell you the number of adolescents and young adults that I've worked with that are just carrying around immense amounts of shame, feeling like there is something broken inside of them, something that is defective, feeling like, hey, everybody else got dealt this full deck of cards, but my deck's a couple cards short. And I've had to try and figure out how to make do with what I got. And unfortunately, I've made some mistakes, which then turns into, well, I must be a mistake. And so I think that's where there's a lot of healing around that shame that people carry when it comes to, substance use, especially when it makes them feel like they're an outsider or a problem or a burden. You hear this language being used, and it's very all-encompassing. I mean, and you look at just the way that individuals are targeted through this marketing and through this misinformation, because people have a lot of money invested in a lot of these products, like in terms of vaping, in terms of cigarettes, in terms of cannabis, in terms of alcohol. These organizations, the people that are backing them, hey, they're looking to make a profit. And they will go out there and they will misrepresent what's going on. I mean, we've all seen the videos of the big tobacco industry just kind of sitting there, in front of the council and denying, these substances. No, they're not addictive. No, they're not addictive. They don't cause cancer. And it's like, oh, of course. And then we've seen all the videos and now like the shows that have kind of stemmed out of what happened with the Purdue pharmaceutical company and how they were aggressively marketing what OxyContin is and what these opioids do. And just kind of getting out there, no, it's not addictive. If they start to not get, just give them another one, right? And that's kind of looking at what's the angle that's being presented to the general public that's going to create that buy-in and it's going to gain customers. Hey, you want to relax? Here's a way to relax. But we're not going to talk about what's the cost of that. And I think that's the part when we're kind of looking at some of the biggest challenges that we run up against, especially when we're trying to help somebody see, hey, there's another side of this story, right? We're kind of stuck, looking at this movie of our life and we're stuck staring at this snapshot. We got to kind of play this tape all the way through here. And we got to look at what are these are what the messages are communicating and what's the other side of this message? Because there's a lot of positive marketing on social media, on TV, about alcohol, about substances that are getting pushed out there, especially since certain substances have become legal. There's been a mass media rush to get in there and to get these messages in front of people. And it's like, hey, you hear that message enough, you start to believe it uh, until you do some digging, right? And I think that's part of the challenge is that sometimes for us as helpers, kind of trying to intervene, help other individuals see that there's a different course to take, is that we might be the only voice, encouraging and fighting for and supporting that person towards making a different decision about not using substances versus, I understand it helps your anxiety and this has also been shown to increase panic attacks and increase feelings of passive suicidal ideation, right? So we need to kind of make sure that we're finding some other supports and resources that help you feel empowered for you to cope in a different way than turning to a substance, something outside of you to take it away. And there's a lot of factors that are at play when we're talking about working with our adolescents. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar has seen that and has heard that. We talk about the influences of the peer group, social pressure. And it's not so much like, hey, you got to do this. What's wrong with you, nerd? Like, no, it's not that. It's a lot of times what gets turned into is that internal pressure. I'm sitting here and now I'm starting to feel anxious because I'm seeing everybody else around me doing this and engaging in it. And as people, what do we all want to do? We want to feel like we have a place and that we fit in. And especially during adolescence and young adulthood, that's critical, is feeling accepted and a part of a group. And if that group is engaging in these behaviors, it can be really isolating and difficult to make that choice. And I was having a conversation with a young man the other night who is making that choice, who is doing this. He's like, look, you are, the company you keep is a reflection of you. And he's like, I've been told throughout the years, there's a certain kind of company like I got to be careful of because they could get me on a different path. And so a lot of my friends are now doing this every weekend. And so I'm spending a lot of time on these weekends because I don't want that for myself. Spending a lot of that time alone, and that's a hard place to be. And so I just don't know what to do because at some point I'm going to cave and give in. I know it. And so finding a place socially where people feel connected and accepted for who they are and that they don't feel pressured to, go against their values is a really big challenge at this age. We also know, especially with a big push for legalization that happened during the COVID years. All of a sudden, marijuana went from being illegal to legal. And now we're seeing, cannabis being used in the homes, being left out. What's the message that's being communicated? It's like, hey, this is how I deal with my stress, or this is how I reward myself. No different than what we were seeing with what is the family communicating about the relationship with alcohol? How is alcohol treated in our household? What are the messages surrounding that? Hey, dad had a rough day at work, and the first thing I see him do is pour himself a glass of Macallan 12. Like, okay, so I'm learning, I'm watching, I'm seeing this happen for years in my household. I learned stress, bad day, drinking makes it okay. And so that's part of the education component for the parents and the family members who have a direct impact on these young people's lives is saying, what messages are you inadvertently communicating to your child about the relationship with alcohol or with other substances, that's okay, right? We also know that anxiety, depression, and trauma, you know, put people at a much more, high risk position of looking for a way to alleviate that emotional distress that they're carrying because they're going to be seeking relief. And that's a lot of times what these substances can promise. While at the same time, long term, making the very symptoms that they saw that they were seeking relief from much more intense and stronger than they were to begin with. And that's where I've heard a lot of people say, hey, my medication doesn't work. Why doesn't my medication work? I've been taking this for 6 months, but I've also been smoking cannabis every day. And then all of a sudden they get a period of sobriety for 3 weeks, and it's like, wow, I'm feeling that relief. The medication starts to kick in and starts to be effective and work on the brain the way it's intended to, right? And so that's part of that, puzzle, putting it together. What's going to be helpful? We also know that a lot of times what puts people in danger is if they have all this unstructured time and a lack of direct parental or an adult supervision where it's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go over to so and so's house. It's a free for all. Their parents aren't home. I can do whatever I want. Or I have all this time. I don't got to worry about school. And so now we're just out there back in the woods in our treehouse where, we just kind of gather and hang out and we spend a lot of time. But nobody has any clue what goes on in these places. And so not having that direct supervision opens up a big, possibility of something kind of going awry here. We also look at who are people following on social media? What are the messages that are being communicated on there? What is going on? What are they seeing on their Snapchat? Things along those lines. As well as, in our environment, in our communities, there's a lot of pressure in these highly competitive schools and a lot of pressure at home to do well, to perform, to take these AP classes, to put together a beautiful your resume that will get you into the right school because you have to compete and stand out. So now that academic stress and pressure and the number of kids that I've talked with, that I'm sure you all see too and talk with, that are staying up till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, are feeling overwhelmed, feeling hopeless about their future just because of the stress that they are feeling in that school environment because they are pushing themselves to excel. And it's like, hey, we need to be a little bit more gentle understanding, knowing that there's a lot of different factors we're balancing at this time. And so let's find a way to kind of let's evaluate that performance pressure we're putting on ourselves and find a more supportive stance that might be useful in our goals here. So what are some of those current factors and patterns that we're really seeing right now when it comes to, adolescent substance use? We're seeing an earlier age of people beginning to get initiated and starting their use. And when you see an increase in the supply flooding the market through legalization of certain substances, you're going to see an increase in access now becoming in the home environments and other avenues and other outlets, right? So we're seeing that experimentation age starting to really creep up between 12 and 14 a little bit more. So we're looking at that middle school period where people are starting to get a little bit more curious and now they got access. And it's like, I've heard about this. What does this do? And what we've also seen throughout this time period now is that polysubstance use is becoming a lot more common. And so we're looking at, the combination of amphetamines such as Adderall, Vyvanse, those ADHD medications, looking at, cannabis and alcohol, like those three substances, or alcohol and cannabis getting used together, or Adderall and alcohol getting used together, because people are looking for those ways in which they interact and those synergistic effects. And so when we're working with individuals who are using, some of the questions that we might inquire, kind of put out there to try and engage, hey, is this something they're engaging? It's like, hey, instead of saying, do you ever mix substances? What substances do you use together? Or when you're with your friends, there used to be pill parties. Like people would grab pills, throw them in a glass jar, and it's like, hey, grab some and take them. And it's like, oh, we'll see what happens. And I remember hearing about these parties, right? And so it's not that those are things that a thing of the past. Things like this still happen. So when people are together with their friends, hey, what do you mix when you're with your friends? And so these are just some ways to kind of find out what does that landscape look like in terms of their use when they're engaging. We also know that there's been certain substances that are, perceived through the general public as being low risk or harmless or safe. And so, again, that's a lot of marketing that's kind of gone into shift the public perception of substances and not take into account that, hey, that brain is still developing. And what we know is that emotional memories and connections and associations that are made are really strong, really powerful. And people are able to usually recall the first time they experienced a euphoric feeling and be like, oh, I can remember that. And so that's a powerful message that gets encoded that can really put somebody on a dangerous track. We also know that with the invention of the smartphone, there's been lot more new avenues for people to travel to sell their products that they are marketing. And we also know that through the general mail, people will sell and ship their products across the country. And whether they are these research chemicals that are hard to trace, that are one molecule off from the actual substance, or just going through Telegram, which is an encrypted messaging service so that they can't be tracked, or using Snapchat to say, hey, this is what I got on sale this week. First come, first serve. These are very popular platforms that people are using to market and to provide other interested individuals with what it is that they are offering this week. And I've had quite a few people sit down and show with me what their Telegram looks like and what they're showing out. And just a really, when we look at this, it's really hard to track that and follow. And a very common platform people are using to gain access to substances. The substances that are really kind of emerging that we're seeing a much bigger frequency of showing up, right, is that high potency cannabis. Again, cannabis today, much different than the cannabis of years in the past. We're seeing that misuse of the prescription stimulants, whether it is to kind of get that euphoric feeling or because of stress or academic pressure or the feeling that I got to keep up and there's a lot I need to do. And I know, hey, if I get the Adderall, if I get that Vyvanse, like I feel really good. And all of a sudden now, there's nothing I can't do. And I'm okay being super focused until 1 or 2 in the morning because I know I'm going to get it done. We also have seen throughout these years, right? And it's the push for these synthetic and these counterfeit pills getting pushed out into the market. The one pill can kill push, just making people aware, making sure that people have testing kits to know, hey, am I actually getting what I'm told I was getting? Because these pill presses work can make these substances look very much what they are intended to look like and just be a pill pressed full of fentanyl, knowing that these drugs are not what people believe they are getting. Even with for example, like a bag of cocaine that I had an individual get that he thought it was a bag of cocaine and it was a bag full of fentanyl. And I know he used that and he's like, it didn't feel right away. And I yelled and my mom got attention. And luckily we had Narcan in the house because that saved my life. And I think that's the part is it's not the intention to have this happen, but with what is happening in this landscape in this world is that there's a lot of fake substances being pushed out there that could cost an individual their life and making people aware of, hey, there is a big risk here. And we need to make sure that if you go down this path, it doesn't need to cost you your life because there's always the possibility to kind of get back on the path and get back to what you want to do. We also know throughout this period, right, vaping is just continue to be seen as like safer. And as you're just seeing the market flooded with different vapes, different flavors, different ways that people can use them, people are just continuing to view cannabis as low risk or medicinal. And social media is really playing a role here. And so what we're looking at now from the Monitoring the Future survey, what they found out is they're kind of like, look, alcohol still number one at the top. We're seeing it continue to be perpetuate here. You look at where it starts out in 8th grade from about 13% reporting having used until senior year, we got about 41% of the 42% of the population reporting that they have used alcohol. Then you have nicotine and vaping here, which is also kind of just skyrocket. And I saw 21% for 12th graders. And for me personally, I always feel like it feels like almost 90% of the adolescents I see have a vape and report vaping. Or if they are not vaping, it's because there have been very strict parameters put on them within that home environment that they are making sure that that person doesn't have access. And if they do have access, they have a nicotine urine drug test they are taking to help them make a different choice in those moments they might feel pressured. And so the second most consumed substance that was used recreationally is cannabis with anything greater than a higher, like greater than 3% THC. And again, 3% THC doesn't really exist for the most part nowadays. Um, this is when you're looking at those numbers are just staggering. You got 70 million Americans over the age of 12 having used cannabis in the past year. That's 22% of the US population reporting that they've used cannabis within the past 12 months. And so let's talk a second about like this high potency cannabis, because this is one of the things that when we look at it, it affects that developing brain holistically. So we look at where it was in the 90s. Again, totally different drug, right? It's 4% mid 90s. Today it's 21% on average. So again, that's like saying somebody's drinking Boone's Farm and then going from Boone's Farm and that's your drink of choice to Bacardi 151 and saying it's like the same thing. We know these are two very different substances altogether. They may both be alcohol, but they have very different effects on the individual. That's really what we're seeing here with marijuana and on that brain. And so it's like, hey, if you were to smoke one joint back in the 90s, that's the equivalent, or one joint nowadays, it's like the equivalent of smoking five joints in the 90s. And so what we know is that some of these substances can contain up to 90% pure THC. This is why we are seeing such an increase in psychosis related to marijuana and cannabis use, especially in that developing brain and young adulthood. It's not uncommon for people to tell me that they see shadow figures, they see tracers, when they wave their hand, they kind of see it kind of moving in like slow motion, they kind of see like shifting like that, or they believe that they hear things and like that increase in paranoia, or to have cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is triggered solely because of just how potent cannabis is and the way it affects the brain. And what cannabinoid hyperemesis is cyclical vomiting. And so this is something that is triggered by the onset of cannabis use that leads to a person vomiting profusely for hours. And a lot of times warm showers are the way that people get relief from that. There's a young man I worked with that, he liked to believe like, oh, it was just a bad batch. It won't happen again. But every time he returned to smoking, he would end up in the ER until he got to the point, he's like, I just can't use this. One of those biggest concerns, again, we're seeing the Xanax, the Percocet, or Adderall being pressed. And really being said that, oh, this is what the substance is, when it's reality, it's fentanyl. So the idea like, oh, I might be getting this pill, it might not be real. And so this can cause overdose incredibly fast for an individual, especially if, no one's in the area has Narcan, or if they're using it by themselves, which puts them in a very dangerous position. And so, what are some of those warning signs and red flags for us to be aware of and to notice as helpers, as individuals involved in these individuals' lives? It's noticing, hey, these behavior changes or these mood changes, these personality changes. A lot of times when talking with families about this, they would kind of describe it as if it was like, it just happened one day where it just all hit me where I'm like, my son or my daughter, as I knew them, it was like they woke up one day and that person that I had known for their entire life was just replaced with like a clone or a version of themselves that looked like them, but didn't really talk like them, act like them, or really engage with us like them. And it's like almost living with a stranger here. You see this decline in their academic performance because in these moments, hey, the priority isn't the schooling or the academics. It is, I want to feel good. And this is my avenue to feeling good or feeling that relief. Or I just want to escape, and this is how I escape. You see people kind of pull away from those things that really they enjoy, feel like gives them a sense of purpose and an identity. And now it's like, hey, my identity is wrapped up around this. And that's where a lot of people really struggle with the idea of letting it go. Because if I let go of this, now I'm faced with the idea of who am I? And the reality is, I've been spending a lot of time getting away from myself that I have no clue who I am anymore. And that's terrifying in of itself. You look at these changes in sleep, appetite, friend groups, all these things, you just kind of say, hey, when do you start hanging out with these people? Why do you always go to so-and-so's house, right? Or all of a sudden now it's like it seems like every time you go home, like we don't have enough food in the house to kind of keep you hungry or keep you full. Or a sudden now, like you're only sleeping a couple hours a night. You're staying up all night. What's going on here? Or just noticing some of those like very in your face signs that let you know something is up in terms of like, hey, like there's a strange odor always coming from your room. Or you have incense burning nonstop in here. Or you seem really lethargic. Like, what's going on? Or your eyes are just, it's not allergy season. It's the middle of winter. There is no, pollen or grass floating around. So why are your eyes so red? Right? And so there's some huge consequences that happen here as a result of this. You look at people's the brain development, right? We talked about that. You look at these mental health symptoms like we discussed increasing. Sometimes because of what happens and people bringing it into environments, right? Crossing these lines that they set out for themselves, where it's like, I'm never going to do it here, or I'm never going to use on weekdays, or I'll never use in the school setting, or I'll never use before school. I only use after school, right? These lines that people try to put in place to control a substance or a behavior, they get crossed. And once they get crossed, what I've heard historically is like, hey, there's guilt. There's that initial knee jerk. I feel bad. I can't believe I did that. And once I cross that line, it makes it a little bit easier each time to kind of cross it. And that can lead to putting people in positions where now there's school, like the school frame is on them, or legal is now involved. And now the family is saying, hey, you don't come around as much. You're really short with us. When you're around us, you're quiet, you're isolated, you're wearing sunglasses in the house 24/7. Like, I don't get it. Or now your friends are not seeing you. And that's usually a huge thing where it's like the people I really care about, the people I've grown up with, the ones that I've always hung out with, like now they want nothing to do with me, or I want nothing to do with them because our values and our priorities are shifting, which can lead to feelings of isolation and disconnect. And so those are some of those just consequences that just kind of, fly right in the face of what's going on. And a lot of times what I've heard and seen is you can go one of two ways with that. That can be a motivator to kind of say, hey, I want to kind of reconnect with these things. These are things that bring value and meaning and a sense of purpose and direction in my life. I want to capture that. I need to make changes that support that. Or it becomes I'm just going to double down because I've already lost all these things and I feel hopeless and I feel helpless that I can regain and recapture that. And so there are some ways for us to really help people engage and really connect with themselves and show up in the world the way that they want to be showing up. And like one of those frames when we're talking about interventions and ways to just engage, and I like to kind of like, embody this frame throughout the times of like talking with just anybody in general is motivational interviewing, right? Because in order for me to be able to hear or for you to trust that I'm open to hearing and genuinely curious in your experience and really treating you as an expert on your own life instead of me warning and trying to correct or tell you where you're screwing up, like I need to really be present and find a way to partner, right? And let you know, like, hey, just fully accepting and going to invoke compassion, and we need to empower you to make that change because I can't do it for you. But really partnering and letting that other person know, like, hey, I'm on your side, and I need you to understand, and I want you to feel that in these interactions and in these engagements. And that's what the spirit of motivational interviewing really does. And then we look at some other ways, like after we have that partnership, we have that working alliance. Because if we don't have that and we go and offer these interventions or these other ways to navigate through like CBT, like, hey, we're going to reframe your thinking. I'm not open to that. You just took 2 seconds talking to me. Or like, here's some DBT, some mindfulness skills. Yeah, I don't want to sit with myself. That's what the drugs do. It helps me get away from me. Thank you. Or using ACT as a way to kind of connect with what matters to you. When it might feel like, oh, you spent a couple minutes talking to me, but you didn't take the time to understand, like, nothing in my life feels like it matters at this point. And that's where really that partnership is so critical in order for those other schools of thought and interventions to be really helpful and effective. And one of the most powerful things we can do is really eliciting that family support in the process. Because the families a lot of times are going to be hit with this crisis, right? What do people do when a crisis comes into the home or things kind of get off course from what we intend for it to kind of get to? We want to control it. We need to kind of get things back on track here. And so it would happen very often. It was a very common approach. It's like, oh my gosh, things got out of line here. I need to control it. Nope. You grab the steering wheel, no mas. I'm going to take this back. And so, in order to kind of try and control this, and the intention is to help you kind of get back to the life I want for you, and I know you want for yourself. Now, the problem is the intention isn't what is experienced through these interactions. It is the impact that the individual remembers. The impact feels as if they are on their back and working against them. And it used to come up all the time in treatment where people would say, like adults, young adults and adolescents, even adults would say, they're on my back. And so it was really important to figure out with their loved ones, as well as that individual, hey, how can you experience them as having your back when these behaviors are being engaged, right? Because you hear all the time, I'm going to take the phone, I'm going to search your room, I'm going to punish, restrict, and I'm going to put you into a tomb of isolation because you're going to learn this doesn't work. And what we know is that in order to help move forward, we need to have that connection. It doesn't mean permission is granted recklessly or that we are co-signing on these behaviors that we know are harming. We know that we need to have like those expectations and boundaries while also fostering that connection, because that influence that family members and loved ones and partners have is so much greater than they believe it to be. And we need to make sure that, hey, before we just jump in and say, hand me your phone. No, it's not happening anymore. We need to have a conversation because that step generally gets missed. We just kick it into overdrive because we are trying to stop it. But we need to really show and build and elicit that trust between the parties here. Because scare tactics don't work. Like that scared straight show, and I've seen it work in numerous things where it's like, you do this, or you better do, or this will happen. Now the challenge is a lot of times scare tactics are put into place, and then there's no follow through or backup. And so I always tell people, don't put out there a boundary or a punishment that you are not going to follow or execute. Because if you do that, and then they go violate that, and we do nothing, that is just inadvertently undermined any authority or power that you had in the relationship. So let's not try to scare people straight. Let's try to work together and kind of do this, right? One of the biggest things that we also know that is so powerful and so critical isn't just so much the words that we say, but also the behaviors that we show and we display in the environment. So it's making sure that we're not being hypocritical. I can't practice and do this and tell you at the same time not to. I need to set that example. I need to really model the expectation of I'm having a rough day, or maybe I'm not feeling the greatest. And instead of me turning to this, that, or the other, I'm talking about it, or I'm engaging in some self-care activities, or I'm engaging in physical exercise, right? As a way to kind of work through that and help co-regulate my emotional experiences. One of the big thing of the family is knowing the friend group. What's going on? Who are they hanging out with? What happens at so-and-so's house? And do all parents and families have the same expectations as we share? Because I know throughout the years, kind of hearing in different presentations and conferences, one of the biggest areas that families have really struggled is, let's say it's homecoming, prom, kids coming home from college and they're 19, 20 years old. And what's our agreement? What's the expectation around drinking? Are we going to throw our keys in a fishbowl and just let, whatever happens in the basement happens in the basement? Or are we going to say, hey, I understand drinking or smoking maybe something that you see very regularly wherever you're at. And in this home, we don't permit that. We are not okay with that behavior taking place. And I think that comes through those open conversations, just being actively involved in everybody's lives, right? And I think that's where it's like, hey, I'm going to support you to make the next right decision. I'm not going to enable or support those behaviors that I see are directly harming you. And that might mean that you need something different from me than what I've been giving you. And so I can be okay self-reflecting and adjusting what I'm doing to give you the support that you're looking for. And so that's what we know is that when we're working with our, adolescents, young adults, whoever we're working with, families have such important information and they themselves have been on the front lines since day one. And so there's a lot of things and that they've been doing, and there's a lot of information that they carry themselves that is going to be really important for us to know when we're working with their loved ones, because those are going to play roles in their decision making and what they're doing, while also making sure that, hey, we got to respect confidentiality. We're not, stenographers at the courthouse writing down everything that's being said and saying, here you go, here's your copy. Now you know what we did in here. No, we need to respect that confidentiality, letting everybody know, hey, we're working for the betterment of this individual and supporting this relationship in a more healthy manner, because we can respect confidentiality and we must respect confidentiality in order to be helpful to making these changes, right? And so one of the ways that we have to do this, right, is like the old adage is meet them where they're at. But that doesn't mean, because I feel like sometimes it gets misconstrued, like they don't want change, well, then I'll just wait for them to want change. No. Meeting them where they're at means like, hey, if I notice that this is something that in your mind you might not notice as a problem, as a difficulty, or even as important, the way I engage with you is to bring that awareness to the forefront, right? I can offer some double-sided reflections. I can point both things out at the same time that are true and have that confrontation not happen between me and you, but happen internally with yourself, saying, you say that you really love sports and you love being part of a team and you have goals to play in college. And at the same time, you're going out each weekend drinking. And because of that, you're, you know, ineligible for the next month of games. I'm wondering how these two things can exist and what you think is going to help be the best thing for you and your future here. And I think, kind of helps us getting out of that, like, finger pointing, one down approach. It's like, hey, you need to figure this out. You are going to be the one who's responsible for making this decision and owning it at the end of the day. Nobody else is. And so we need to provide that support and the education about what is going to help and what is going to be supportive. Because if people choose to make different choices than maybe what we, professionally and personally agree with, none of these decisions should ever cost an individual their life. And we need to make sure that we're providing whatever awareness and education would be appropriate and helpful for that individual and their family. We need to break down whatever stigma or barriers are present that would interfere with that person reaching out for help, because we know that stigma is one of those things that stops somebody from asking for help. And, we never know if that is the time that they may make a choice that there is no coming back from. We want to make sure that everybody has access at all times to support and conversations that would be helpful and possibly healing. And so to do this, one of the things that we must make sure we're doing is we got to be searching for strengths, right? I like to kind of describe it as like we're going on a treasure hunt for your strengths here. And I don't want to be a deficit detective, because that's naturally what we want to do is like, in therapy and counseling as helpers, it's like, let's find a problem. I'm going to zoom in on this issue and we're going to solve it, versus, hey, I see that this issue's here and you've still been doing 90% of what you need to be doing. What are you pulling on that's helping you get this done? Because we need to highlight those strengths, because those are going to be critical in us being effective and them pulling on those to manage and navigate life with what it's going to throw at them so that they can make different choices in this path. And we need to be aware of, hey, how is that dialogue we talk to ourselves? Like, we need to start shifting that narrative, because if we are constantly cutting ourselves down and beating ourselves down, it's going to be really hard to find the motivation and strength to kind of pull forward. But if we can really acknowledge, like, hey, mistakes have been made and I'm learning from that to do something different, we can pull that forward and really use that to empower our actions. And so this is where really kind of all of us getting on the same page comes in, and having these conversations is the most important thing to do. I'm not telling, we're speaking, we're two people walking down the same path together, looking at it, and you're kind of shining a light on some things I might miss here. And we need to be aware on our own end, hey, what are they using and what are the risks? Why did they start? And can we address this in another way that they might be able to receive or hear that message? And when do they use? Do they use before school, after school, during sports, after sport? Like, on the weekends, at night, with their, like, we need to know that information because these are all important details to know. And are there things that they're doing that put them at risk? We need to be aware of all those factors because what we can do is enhance those protective factors for them. And what we know is that having a strong, attuned relationship with somebody who has their back and is engaged and involved in their life goes a long way, giving individuals ways to manage stress. And that's what people say. It's like, hey, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how to cope. And I will tell you what I'm hearing now from a lot of adolescents, adults I work with is like, I'll mention something. There we go. Like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or four square breathing, or tip, right? A lot of these go-to skills. They'll look at me like, oh, I remember hearing that. I'm like, where did you hear this before? You're telling me you haven't been there. I heard it in school. We talked about it. Like, that's awesome. And so giving people these tools to manage their emotional wellness is critical here. And also helping foster and build those relationships with peers who also want to see the best version of that individual being pulled out. Because that helps with that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging, forming that identity, and really making sure that, hey, when things aren't going great, where do I get that support to make sure that I'm attending to that part of myself that needs that support? That way I'm not kind of, rubbing some dirt on it, walking it off, or pushing that down, because at some point the lid's going to pop and it's going to come out. And it's not going to be the greatest experience. I need to make sure, hey, I have those doors and those paths are open for me to be able to go and have these helpful and healing conversations here. And one thing that we know about recovery is that it's not a one size fits all approach. I think individualizing, I know Donna mentioned earlier, like, hey, individualizing that approach to each person that walks through the door, making sure that everybody has something that is helpful and useful and meaningful and personal to them is critical. And I think that is huge for us to recognize is that, hey, if I'm offering something and it doesn't seem to be working or fitting or aligning with that individual, it's not a them problem, right? That's a me issue that I need to kind of reflect on and kind of say, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't useful. And I'm going to need their insight and their wisdom on themselves to be aware of, hey, what is going to be helpful? I'm noticing that, just really trying to change this thinking and this thought process isn't the most helpful approach right now. Do you think it'd be more of just kind of finding things for us to engage in and connect with that might help this thinking component kind of catch up to what you're actively engaging in doing? And I think that's really important is, getting them to buy in and saying, you know what, hey, that's a good idea. Or, no, I don't think that'll work either. But I got some ideas. Awesome. Let's hear them, right? And so we want to make sure that no matter how they came in to sit before us, whether it's a court recommendation, school intervening, family's concern, we want to make sure that we are fostering that supportive engagement. And we want to make sure that, hey, it's all about, we want to validate and affirm the attempts that are being made. And people will say it all the time. I hear it's like, but I still did blah, 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 blah. Well, it sounds like you actually, practiced, forced breathing. You went and shot baskets outside. You talked to a friend. That was 45 minutes of time and energy that you put into before making that choice. So let's talk about what did you kind of learn through that experience? Let's use this as a teaching moment versus saying this was a complete and total wash and no good. You got a lot of really important information in that process. Let's see how we can apply that for your long-term recovery here as we're discussing this, because that's a huge success. And we want to make sure we're celebrating it. A lot of times people will invalidate themselves knowing that, well, I should have been doing that all along, and you got away from it. So let's acknowledge this as a win, because we want to make sure that we are setting people up for success. And that's really the goal in all this, is that we want to bring it all together, right? Because if we can identify this early, and the earlier we intervene, the greater the likelihood we can kind of get people back onto that path that inspires hope, meaning, purpose, and a sense of direction and connection with the family and the community, because that's huge. Because what we do know is that, hey, even though it may feel hopeless, that individual is not hopeless. And we can help them capture recovery and really the life that they want to be living in a meaningful, personal way that moves them forward in their life. And so I just want to say thank you everybody for joining. And I know it was a big switch and at the 11th hour here, so I appreciate everybody kind of sitting through and being present. So I'll turn it back to Donna now at this point for any questions.
Thank you so much, Justin. Again, like we could listen to you for hours. Like, I mean, the knowledge and the experience that you bring is always so amazing to me.
Tell me more,
But we do
Donna.
have some questions, so I'm going to go right into them because I know we're at
Yeah.
the hour almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions was is that future substance use number earlier on in your presentation affected if the client has early use, like 12 or 13, but receives treatment leading to the use being halted for the remainder of their adolescence?
I think that's a great question. Because the number, right, it just didn't kind of go into if they had halted. And I would say from just like personal experience, I've seen quite a few individuals who have done that, right? They recognized early on, 13, 14, they kind of get on this different path and then they kind of find themselves and they make that change. And that is really the powerful connection that they are able to recognize that that lifestyle that doesn't help me be the person I want to be. So I've seen that be significant there.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a couple other ones. How can school professionals support students who heavily use substances but are not open to support, such as school-based substance groups, outside therapy, or res?
Yeah. I think finding whatever entry point you can is critical because that gate, that door, and I think that's sometimes like the frustrating thing that I have to talk with other people as well as even check myself is like, hey, like we can identify this. We all may know this and acknowledge that this is a problem and understand like we may be meeting somebody at the very early stages of the change process. And think about our own behavior that we display when it comes to any kind of change. What do? We try to delay change as long as possible, even if it's something as small as maybe I should change my hairstyle. How long were you thinking about changing your hairstyle before you actually did it? And what measures did you go through before actually following through and executing that? And I think kind of taking that approach helps us understand like, hey, we're at that beginning stage of change with them. And so we need to actually honor that and just really focus on building that level of trust and supporting that person's autonomy and that dynamic there. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Um, and it's tricky, like, right? Like it is like you have to find someone to connect with them, right?
Mhm.
I'm curious what you think about schools having drug testing policies. Also, do you think that it is within a school's purview to make drug testing strips available? Do you think that there is this distinction between public and private schools?
Mm. It's a great question. Wow. And like that's something I'd want to give a lot of thought to before I just kind of speak off the cuff. Like, because a lot of times the schools on the front lines, they're the ones who are seeing all this
Yeah,
going on. And I know, student safety is at the utmost importance. Um, no, but that's a great thing. And
I know. That's a hard
yeah.
one.
Like, Don,
Here's
are you
some,
able to send that to me later? Because I'd love to kind of like follow up on that if you're able
yeah,
to.
yeah, I will.
Perfect. Thank
Also,
you.
there's so many more, but I know we're at the hour, but do you have a couple more minutes, Justin?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Someone said I'm a substance use counselor at a high school district in south suburbs of Chicago. I'm aware of much of this information, but the biggest challenge that I come across is when parents are not involved or they don't want to be, or also they have many of their own problems. These are
Yeah.
the students that don't get the help and need they need it the most, right? I meet with
Yeah.
them individually. I use motivational interviewing and I meet them where they're at. But it's hard to encourage them to make a change or see it's a problem or on the path to addiction when the people around them aren't willing to or providing any support. You have any
Right.
suggestions on how to reach them and or their parents or some other approaches and ways to help them? Yeah, we've
Yeah.
all
No, that's
struggled
a,
with that, right? Like the
what's
parents.
that?
We've all struggled with that, like in many avenues, right? The parents, the family
Yeah.
life.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think that's one of the things to know is like a lot of times when we're kind of working with these individuals that are coming into our care, it's also like we're watching almost like the dissolution of like the dream or the idea of who their kid was going to be. Or like
Mhm.
those hopes and those dreams that parents have for their children. So this can be a very painful area to kind of dive into from a family perspective, because it means if I accept this and I acknowledge this, then that's really making it real. And so if those families, because I think the biggest change and challenges for those individuals, particularly finding that support. So if it's not going to be in that home environment, is there a mentor? Is there a relationship with a coach or a community-based partner that we can kind of engage them with, that we can connect them with, that helps them feel like they have a meaning, a sense of connection and purpose? Because if we aren't able to help them feel connected while also continue to work with the family on the back end and kind of having those conversations, making sure that this conversation doesn't stop, because they're going to be an integral part of that individual's change process as well. So I know I've seen people find those supports, whether it's like through an activity or even just being that individual that's still following up and taking the time to connect, even if they're saying, "Hey, I don't want any of this. I don't want any." That's saying there's a big defense mechanism kicking into gear. And I'm showing you over time that you're worth not giving up on. You are worth me taking the time to step aside and check in with you because I care about you as a person and I don't see you as a problem. Where a lot of people will say they see themselves and view themselves as the problem. So
Sorry, I'm looking at, there's other
yeah,
questions here. Best
I'm just
ways
like
to
I'm
interview.
like looking at your face. I'm like, oh no, I totally didn't answer that. I guess.
No, no, I was like trying to like go back up because I'm like, okay, I missed some. I
Yeah.
know one of the questions was that I think it was the 60% on your very first slide, maybe the
Yeah, don't talk to their kids about don't use
yeah,
drugs.
and it was like, where'd you get that stat? Someone asked.
Yeah, I can send out like I'll send the resources later
Okay,
because there've been a lot of studies about it, and I will tell you from my experience, working in like the dual diagnosis adolescent program forever, and like I'd ask the parents like, did you tell them not to use drugs before they started using?
yeah,
And but a lot of times the response would be like, well, I didn't think I had to. I thought it was just like common knowledge.
a given. Yeah,
And like I would hear from the adolescent, like one in particular, like this family session, like it's weird how like these things like just like vividly stand out in my mind. Looked at it as like mom and dad and goes like, you guys never told me not to smoke weed. Why did you not tell me to not do this?
ah,
Like they're like, we thought you knew. And it's like, I'm 14 years old. Like,
yeah,
and I think that's the part where it's like it wasn't like they were trying to neglect or it was just like what somebody's messaging this to them. So I think it's like checking a box, right?
yeah.
Where it's like, hey, it's mom, dad, like I just want to make sure you're getting this information and I want you to know like we love you and care about you. And there's things that can really pull you away from the best version of you. And that includes X, Y, and Z. I don't want to see you doing that because I love you and I don't want to see any harm come your way.
Right.
And if it
Well, and
comes
I
up,
think
let's talk about it, right?
right. Well, and I think when they did the DARE program at school, right? Like sometimes in sixth grade or whatever, then the parents would have that information and maybe then they would say, yeah, like you can't, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
not like they would even think of it. Like you think, okay, you can't drive till you're 16, like that kind of stuff. You
Yeah.
don't drink till you're 21, whatever. And it's like, yeah. So okay, what are the best ways to intervene or support in the outpatient setting? Do teens often need inpatient or stop to stop or lessen their use?
I think a lot, I mean, it's like, and you saw us, like Don and I have worked together for like many, many years, you
Yeah.
know. Um, like you would say where it's there's individuals if they have enough support and the right resources available, right? You have that family like that family support and engagement. You have a healthy peer group. You have a lot of times you build or you work on forming that sense of identity and you have a clear direction about where you want to head. Hey, we can make those changes. But if somebody is walking that path alone and the idea is like, I just need to try harder or kind of like white knuckle it and gut it out, and I need to just not do this behavior, then they're really in a dangerous position to not be able to be successful in those attempts. So I think I know I'm not answering it like black or white because I genuinely believe with each person it is different, it is unique given their circumstances of what they're working with, and a lot of people can make that change without the need for intensified services. So sometimes they can make that change through just interactions with their school counselor or school social worker or their outpatient therapist one-on-one, helping support like what change looks like and coming up with a plan about what's that direction and what's this course of treatment or engagement going to look like. But if I'm just going to say, hey, I just need you to not do this, uh, And
Yeah.
now you're kind of like a jellyfish out of the ocean with like no sense of direction or where to go. Well, then this is a setup because your best thinking is kind of led here. We need to kind of support you in identifying what does that path look like. And then you get people based on a lot of these substances that are so powerful that have been so ingrained with their sense of identity, connection, relationships that it's hard to let go of that because if I let go of that, like I feel overwhelmed and hopeless. And
Yeah.
now we start looking at the position where I don't have any other resources or supports in place. And now I might need to look at a different kind of setting or structure that moves that change forward because
Yeah.
I just can't do it alone.
Yeah. And so from the same person, she said, so like, and I know you've dealt with this, like if a client hasn't spoken to their parents about their use yet, is it your obligation, meaning the person working with the student, to bring it up to the family, or do you honor the confidentiality?
So when this is going on with the people that I work with, because you can't like unless they're actively using something that is putting them necessarily in harm's way or overdosing, there's like fears or risk of overdose, then that's kind of a, okay, like I'm looking out for your well-being, I'm looking out for your safety. And I wouldn't do it regardless without having a conversation with that individual.
Right.
And I think that's something, for example, like I had a conversation with a young client the other day, and what we were talking about was just, these, feeling overwhelmed and some of the behaviors that had come out. And I'm like, look, I think you're at home. The stress that you're experiencing there and the support that you need may be able to be elicited from your family members if they know what's going on, right? If they're
Hmm.
aware of what's happening. Are you open to having that conversation and saying that it's not just going to be you leading it? I want to make sure I'm able to support you in that journey. What do you
Yeah.
need from me that's going to be helpful in these moments, right? And so we got to a place where they were able to take that step and we had that conversation. And as I'm leading the mom back to the room, I go, hey, I just want to make you aware, like this conversation, we're going to touch on something a little bit more that might trigger something emotionally. I want to let you know we've been working on this and they have now gotten themselves to a position where they are able and willing to do this. So this is a big step for them. I want you to just not saying that you're going to give, this blessing of like free pass on everything. I just want you to take that into consideration while we're having this conversation so you can see it from their experience.
Yeah. That's good. A couple other things. What's the single best way to support youth with these trends, current trends, as a therapist, as school social workers, parents, etc.? Any
Yeah.
advice on that?
I think being open, honest, and treating them as like I don't want to treat you as naive because I genuinely believe you probably know more than I do. Like, but I think kind of saying, hey, I know you're hearing a lot of this information. I also want to kind of give you some additional information that you can choose to do with it as you please. Like I just want to make sure that you have this all ahead when you make choices that are going to be what you believe in your best interest here.
Yeah.
So I just because I don't like to say, hey, like you better do this or else. Um,
Right.
Because then nobody likes that experience. Like, think about people that talk like that to you in your own life. I always like to kind of frame it as like, if somebody was giving you that kind of information or that feedback, how would you want that to be delivered to you? What would you need to see from that person to help you be open to the experience of that conversation?
Yeah. Well, the connection, like you said earlier, is like one of the biggest things is just trying to help connect, right? Okay, anything I know you talked about, and I know we're way over, but like I know, and this is always a thing, especially working with high school kids, well, and actually adolescents in general, the high school, the pressure for
Yeah.
academics, right? And how
Yeah.
substance use will play into that. How do you inform administrators who push that advanced curriculum, how it
Mhm.
affects our students?
I mean, I think right, it's done with a well intention. I think honoring and validating that, like, hey, we're
Hmm.
wanting them to kind of be like, super smart young adolescents that are developing and top, great reputation. All that is true, and there is a cost to this too that's happening.
Yeah,
And let's be cognizant of like when we're talking about our students' health, emotional health is still health and physical health, right? And we want our kids to be healthy. And in order to be in order to succeed in school, we need to make sure that their health is prioritized. So are we doing inadvertently some things that may be putting their health in harm's way that we're missing, right?
the last thing I'll say is just, and you kind of already answered this one, I feel like, but when is residential or a more intensive form of treatment recommended?
When we
Right? I mean,
see when does it get recommended?
yeah. When do you think it should be recommended?
When we see the intensification of the behaviors. or continued behaviors despite a high level of intervention. You see, like in the home environment. So a lot of times, like when it comes to adolescents and young adults, the key thing that comes up that really tells me, okay, we're kind of at that point. Their uses continue despite their parents being all over them. And you look at the extent and the creativity. Because I always think it's important to validate,
I
like,
know.
you're super creative.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
look how resourceful you are. You have a problem or this barrier put in front of you. You found like 500 ways to like
Exactly.
disable this camera system. And I'm like, when did you teach yourself to become an electrician? Like,
Exactly.
but I think it's just kind of speaking to like just the lengths that people are willing to go to engage in this behavior while also looking at what are your responsibilities at this stage of life. And if we're not meeting those and the emotional and the mental health is deteriorating and those symptoms are intensifying and you're feeling hopeless, helpless, um, suicide ideation is a common thing. It's not a unique thing. You hear people make the comments like, I woke up today and I go, oh crap. Um, right? Like those are all signs that scream, I'm not functioning well. And when I'm not functioning well, and it's not that from a lack of trying,
Yeah.
I'm fighting a lot of inner battles that other people don't see. And that's taking a lot out of me. I'm going to need somebody else to kind of join me in this fight. And right now, maybe in the home environment and managing the responsibilities there and school, like I'm, it's set up to fail. I need to be in an environment where I'm able to focus on me and everything that I'm kind of bringing to the equation that needs the attention that it needs.
Yeah, I agree. Again, thank you so much. I know we went over just looking at the participants, Justin, obviously people are still here listening. And so it's so critical and a topic that I think is ongoing, right? Like ever
Absolutely.
changing. So again,
Absolutely.
thanks so much for doing that. And yes, like Justin, they asked if they can have some slides, if we can
Here
send those
comes
out. And so yes, we can do that. And then again, if there's any questions, Justin's information, you want to put that slide up, Justin?
which slide? Oh, here we go. Yeah, this one.
Justin's information is right here. So obviously, if you want to email him directly, and then if you put the last slide up, Justin, which just has mine and Lori's information. If you have any questions or anything that we can help with, obviously, like Justin said, we've known each other for a long time, um, and are still friends, despite
Still
that.
haven't burned that bridge yet. No.
But here's my information and Lori's information. So we are always happy to help assist. If there's any questions about the CEs, obviously let us know. But like I said, you should be getting that information. And then the CE will come out within a week. All right. Thanks, everyone, so much. Have a great day. Stay warm.
Happy Friday. Thank you, Justin. So impactful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin, for coming.